The letter sat unopened on John's kitchen counter for 3 days. The return address showed his Uncle Tom's lawyer in Montana, and John wasn't ready to face whatever it contained. At 45, John had gotten used to his quiet life as an accountant in Chicago. His apartment overlooked a busy street, his days filled with spreadsheets and client meetings. The most adventure he had these days was trying a new coffee shop. When he finally tore open the envelope on a rainy Tuesday evening, his hands shook. Uncle Tom had passed away 3 weeks earlier after a short illness. They hadn't been close in recent years, but John had fond memories of summers spent on his uncle's ranch as a kid, chasing fireflies and riding horses with his cousins. "You've got to be kidding me," John whispered as he read the letter. Uncle Tom had left him the entire ranch, all 500 acres of it, nestled in one of the most beautiful valleys in Montana. The property had been in their family for 3 generations. John called his boss the next morning and took a week off. He packed a small suitcase, locked up his apartment, and drove his aging Honda all the way to Montana, the radio keeping him company as the urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and eventually the jagged mountains of Big Sky country. The ranch looked smaller than he remembered. The white farmhouse needed a fresh coat of paint, and the barn roof had a suspicious sag in one corner. But the backdrop, those mountains rising like giants against the bluest sky he'd ever seen, that was exactly as magical as in his childhood memories. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," a rough voice called out. An older man in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt emerged from the barn, his weathered face cracked into a smile beneath a dusty cowboy hat. "You must be Tom's nephew." "That's me. John Mitchell." He extended his hand. "And you are?" "Bill Henderson. Been the foreman here going on 30 years. Bill's handshake was firm, his skin tough as leather. "Your uncle spoke highly of you." "He did?" John was surprised. "We hadn't talked much these past few years." Bill nodded toward the house. "Come on in. Coffee's hot." Inside, the house was just as John remembered, worn but comfortable furniture, family photos on every wall, the smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. Bill poured 2 mugs of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "So," Bill said, settling into a kitchen chair, "what are your plans for the place?" John stared into his coffee. "Honestly, I have no idea. I'm an accountant, not a rancher." Figured as much. Bill didn't sound judgmental, just matter of fact. "Place like this needs tending. Got 60 head of cattle, 4 horses, and enough maintenance jobs to keep 3 men busy year-round." 60? Last I knew, Uncle Tom only had about 20 cows. "Built the herd up these past few years. Got some good breeding stock now." Pride crept into Bill's voice. "Your uncle was finally turning a decent profit." John walked to the window. From here he could see the stream cutting through the property, sparkling in the afternoon sun. Beyond it, forest land stretched to the base of the mountains. It was breathtaking. "You don't have to decide today," Bill offered. "Stay a while, get to know the place again." And so John did. Days turned into weeks as spring bloomed across the valley. He learned to fix fences alongside Bill, discovered muscles he never knew he had. He met the local vet, a no-nonsense woman named Kate, who taught him how to spot health issues in the herd. The local feed store owner, Joe, gave him a crash course in ranch supplies over countless cups of coffee. Each evening, John would sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. The stress of city life melted away, replaced by a bone-deep tiredness that came from physical work and fresh air. For the first time in years, he slept through the night. 1 month in, John made a decision. He called his boss in Chicago and resigned. Then he called a realtor to list his apartment. "You sure about this?" Bill asked when John told him. "Ranching ain't easy. It's not just the pretty views and horseback rides tourists come for. I'm not naive," John replied. "I know it'll be the hardest thing I've ever done, but when I'm out there," he gestured to the valley, "I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Bill smiled slightly. "Your uncle would be pleased." John spent the next few months learning everything he could. He made mistakes, and plenty of them. He got his truck stuck in mud so deep Bill had to pull him out with the tractor. He accidentally left a gate open and spent hours rounding up escaped cattle. The first time he had to help deliver a calf in the middle of the night, he was sure he'd make a mess of it. But the little heifer arrived healthy despite his fumbling. The neighboring ranchers gradually accepted him, offering advice and occasionally lending equipment. John started joining them for beers at the local tavern on Friday nights, listening to their stories and slowly becoming part of the community. But not everyone welcomed the newcomer. About 3 months after John arrived, Bill pulled him aside, with a serious expression. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Your uncle was having troubles with the new folks who bought the Wilson place last year." "What kind of troubles?" John asked. "Access road troubles. Your uncle let the Wilsons use the northern road through the ranch as a shortcut to town for decades. Neighborly thing to do. But these new people, they bought up all that land bordering your east side, called themselves the Thompsons. City folks with big money." John nodded. "I've seen their place. Looks more like a resort than a working ranch." "That's just it. They're not ranchers. Just rich folks playing cowboy." Bill shook his head. "Anyway, they claimed the other access road to your property, the one that runs along their land, belongs to them now. Said your uncle's easement wasn't properly filed back in the 60s. "Can they do that? Your uncle was fighting it when he got sick. His lawyer has all the paperwork." Bill looked uncomfortable. "Didn't want to burden you with it right away, but you should know what you're dealing with. These folks want this land, and they're not above playing dirty to get it." John looked out across the valley at the land that had somehow become home in just a few short months. He thought about going back to Chicago, to spreadsheets and traffic jams and his tiny apartment. "Well," he said finally, "they've got another thing coming if they think I'm going anywhere." Little did John know, the real battle was just beginning. The first snow of the season dusted the mountains when John spotted the trucks. Heavy equipment, rumbling down the eastern access road, kicking up dust that hung in the crisp morning air. He was out checking fence lines with Bill when they noticed. What in the world? John shielded his eyes against the sun. Bill's weathered face hardened. Nothing good, that's for sure. They drove over in John's truck, bouncing along the rutted dirt road until they reached a spot where they could see clearly. Workers in bright safety vests were unloading concrete barriers from flatbed trucks, positioning them directly across the access road that connected John's ranch to the main highway. John jumped out before the truck fully stopped, marching toward a man in a hard hat who appeared to be supervising. "Hey, what's going on here?" The man glanced up from his clipboard. "Road closure, private property." "This is an access road. It's been used for decades," John protested. "Not anymore." The man pointed to a document in his hand. "I've got orders right here from the property owners, the Thompsons. This road cuts through their land and they're exercising their right to close it." John felt his stomach drop. "There's an easement agreement. My uncle—" "Not my department," the man cut him off. "Take it up with the Thompsons or their lawyers. I'm just doing my job." By afternoon, the barriers were in place, massive concrete blocks impossible to move without heavy equipment. A freshly posted sign read, "Private property, no trespassing," in bold red letters. John took photos with his phone, then called Uncle Tom's lawyer. "This is completely illegal," Jerry Mason assured him over the phone. "That easement has been in place since 1952. I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow." But tomorrow came with more bad news. The Thompsons' legal team had already filed paperwork showing a technical error in the original easement documentation. The KOR description of the exact road path had been imprecisely worded, giving them grounds to contest its validity. "These people have 3 attorneys from some fancy firm in Denver," Jerry explained, frustration evident in his voice. "They're claiming the easement referred to an old timber road that no longer exists, not the current access road." "That's ridiculous," John said. "Everyone knows which road it means." "Of course it's ridiculous, but it's enough to tie this up in court for months, maybe years." The impacts were immediate and devastating. The main road to town was now twice as long, winding around the entire northern edge of the property. The feed delivery truck driver called to say he couldn't make it through with his normal load. The alternate route couldn't support the weight of a fully loaded truck. John would have to make multiple trips to pick up smaller loads in his own vehicle. When the cattle trailer broke an axle on the rough northern road, John knew he needed to confront the Thompsons directly. He drove to their sprawling property, a massive log mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the mountains. 3 luxury SUVs sat in the circular driveway. The man who answered the door looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for expensive outdoor gear. Perfectly pressed khaki pants, a plaid shirt that had never seen a day of actual ranch work. "Can I help you?" he asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "I'm John Mitchell. I own the neighboring ranch. I need to speak with Mr. Thompson about the road closure." A woman appeared behind him, slim and stylish with highlighted hair. "I'm Linda Thompson. This is my husband, Robert." Robert Thompson had the confident stance of someone used to getting his way. "We've been expecting you. Come in." The interior of their home was all polished wood and stone, with artwork that probably cost more than John's entire ranch. They led him to a sitting area with a view of his own land, his modest farmhouse looking small and worn from this distance. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Linda said, following his gaze. "That's why we purchased this property. The views are spectacular. Which is why I don't understand why you'd cut off my access road," John said. "We're neighbors. We should be helping each other." Robert leaned forward. "Let's cut to the chase. We bought this land as a vacation property, a place to escape the crowds and chaos of California. The last thing we want is trucks and farm equipment rumbling past at all hours." "That road has been used by my family for generations," John said, trying to keep his voice level. "It's the only practical way to transport cattle or get deliveries." "The legal situation is quite clear," Robert replied. "The easement documentation is flawed. Our lawyers have confirmed it." "So what am I supposed to do?" "My livelihood depends on that access." Linda gave him what she probably thought was a sympathetic smile. "This is difficult, I know, but there's a simple solution. We've had our eye on your property since we arrived. It would make a perfect extension to our retreat." "You want me to sell?" "The ranch isn't for sale." "Everything has a price," Robert said. "We're prepared to offer $500,000, which is generous considering the current condition of the place." John nearly choked. $500,000? That property is worth at least 3 times that amount. Robert shrugged. "Maybe before you lost proper road access. Without it, the value drops considerably." "This is blackmail," John said quietly. "This is business," Robert corrected. "Think about it. You're not a rancher. You're an accountant playing cowboy. How long before you realize this lifestyle isn't sustainable? We're offering you an easy way out." John stood up. "My family has worked that land for 3 generations. I'm not selling to people who'd use dirty tricks to force me out." "You'll change your mind," Linda called after him as he walked to the door. "Once winter really hits and you're trapped out there with no way to get supplies or move your cattle." The next few weeks proved brutally difficult. John had to hire extra help, just to manage the longer routes. Feed costs doubled with the transportation difficulties. The local vet couldn't reach them when one of the horses colicked, forcing John and Bill to treat the animal themselves, using advice over the phone. During a particularly heavy snowfall, the northern road became completely impassable. They were stranded for 3 days until the county plows finally reached them. By then, they were running dangerously low on propane for heating. One evening, as John sat at the kitchen table poring over bills, Bill placed a cup of coffee beside him. "Nobody would blame you if you sold," the old foreman said quietly. "This isn't the fight you signed up for." John looked up, dark circles under his eyes. "Is that what you think I should do? Give up?" Bill was silent for a long moment. "Your uncle faced down a bank that tried to foreclose during the drought of '89, faced down a mining company that wanted to dig up the East Pasture in '95. He wasn't the type to back down from a fight, especially when he knew he was in the right." John rubbed his eyes. "The lawyer bills alone are killing me, and the Thompsons know it. They're just waiting for me to run out of money." "Then maybe we need to stop playing their game," Bill said. "Maybe we need to think differently." "What do you mean?" Bill tapped the window, pointing toward the pristine view of the valley. "Those rich folks, they came here for something. Figure out what they really want, and you might find your leverage." John stared out at the darkening sky, an idea slowly forming in his mind. If the Thompsons valued exclusivity and pristine views so much, perhaps that was exactly where their weakness lay. The courthouse in town was a 100-year-old building with worn wooden benches and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. John sat alone on one side of the room while the Thompsons huddled with their 3 attorneys on the other. Their expensive suits and confident smiles made John all too aware of his own scuffed boots and second-hand jacket. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Patterson entered the courtroom. The preliminary hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. The Thompsons' lead attorney presented maps, surveys, and historical documents, all carefully selected to cast doubt on the validity of the easement. John's lawyer, Jerry, did his best, but he was clearly outmatched by the resources of the opposition. "While I sympathize with Mr. Mitchell's situation," Judge Patterson said finally, "I cannot issue an emergency injunction at this time. The documentation provided raises legitimate questions about the legal status of the easement that will require further examination. This matter will proceed to trial, with a court date to be set approximately 6 months from now." 6 months. Half a year of being cut off from proper access. John felt the floor tilt beneath him. Outside the courthouse, Robert Thompson approached, his expression almost sympathetic. "This doesn't have to be difficult, John. Our offer still stands. $500,000, and all these problems disappear." John just walked away. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with Jerry and Bill, going over their options. "The news wasn't good. Even if we win, it'll take months," Jerry explained. "And honestly, with the resources they're throwing at this, there's no guarantee. They've hired experts to testify that the original easement refers to a different road, entirely." "Can't we appeal to the county commissioners?" John asked. "This is affecting my ability to run a business." Jerry shook his head. "Local government won't interfere in a private property dispute, not with the kind of political donations the Thompsons have been making." "So, what do we do?" John pushed away from the table, pacing the small kitchen. Bill spoke up. "Can we cut a new road? Through the north pasture, maybe?" "We'd need permits," Jerry said. "Environmental studies. It could take years and cost hundreds of thousands." John stared out the window at the darkening sky. The first stars were appearing, bright pinpricks in the vast Montana night. "I can't just give up. This place isn't just land to me anymore." Later, that night, alone in the house after the others had gone, John couldn't sleep. He went through his monthly accounts for the 3rd time, looking for money that simply wasn't there. The legal fees had already eaten through most of his savings. The extra costs from the road closure were piling up daily. At this rate, he'd be bankrupt long before the case ever went to trial. He walked onto the porch, the night air cold against his face. In the distance, lights glowed from the Thompsons' property. They were having another one of their parties. Every few weekends, fancy cars would arrive carrying guests from California or New York or wherever else rich people came from. John had heard they were tech investors, entertainment executives, and the like. People who wanted to play at being cowboys for a weekend before returning to their real lives. A burst of laughter carried across the valley. John leaned against the porch railing, watching. From this angle, he could see figures moving in front of the Thompsons' massive windows. They all seemed to be gathered at one side of the great room, the side with the perfect view of... John straightened suddenly. The perfect view of his ranch. From the Thompsons' property, his historic barn and farmhouse stood perfectly framed against the backdrop of mountains and forest. The stream that cut through his property caught the moonlight, a silver ribbon winding through the darkness. The next morning, John was up before dawn. When Bill arrived, he found John at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, a determined look on his face. "You figure something out?" Bill asked, pouring himself coffee. "Maybe." John pushed a notepad toward him. "What do rich city people want when they come to Montana?" Bill scanned the list John had made. Views, peace and quiet, wildlife, feeling like they're experiencing the real West. Exactly. And what's the view they're paying for when they visit? The Thompsons. Understanding dawned on Bill's face. Your ranch, the old barn, the horses in the meadow. You can't see the mountains nearly as well from their side without looking across your property. That's right, they're selling exclusive access to a view of my land. John tapped another paper. And I've been doing some research. The Thompsons charge their friends $5,000 a weekend to stay with them. They're making money off my scenery. So what's your plan? If they want to block my access, fine, but they don't get to control what happens on my property. John stood up, a new energy in his movements. First, I need to talk to Jerry about zoning regulations. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. John drove the long way around to town nearly every day, meeting with county officials, researching regulations, making phone calls. The Thompsons noticed the increased activity and sent one of their lawyers to find out what was happening, but John revealed nothing. On Friday evening, a truck struggled up the northern road, carrying a load of lumber. The next day, another arrived with windows and roofing materials. On Sunday morning, a small crew of workers from town arrived and began construction near the stream, right in the center of the Thompsons' cherished view. It didn't take long for Robert Thompson to appear, driving his luxury SUV along the rough, northern road. His face flushed with anger as he approached the construction site. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Mitchell?" he demanded, pointing at the wooden frame taking shape. John continued hammering. "Building a guest cabin, on my property. Right there, in the middle of the valley. It's got the best view." Robert's face darkened. "This is obviously retaliation. You're deliberately trying to ruin the viewshed." "Just exercising my property rights," John replied calmly. "Same as you. I'll file an injunction." "On what grounds?" "I checked all the zoning regulations. I'm well within my rights to build here." Robert looked at the half-built cabin, then at the 3 other marked-out foundations nearby. "You can't seriously be planning to turn this into some kind of resort." "Not a resort," John corrected. "A private ranch experience for paying guests. No one will come all the way out here with that terrible northern access road." John hammered another nail. "Oh, I don't expect them to use the road." He pointed upward as a distinctive sound grew louder. A small helicopter appeared over the ridge, circling once before landing in the cleared area nearby. The pilot cut the engine, and a middle-aged couple climbed out, ducking under the slowing rotors. The woman wore expensive hiking boots that had clearly never seen a trail. The man carried a camera with a lens long enough to photograph wildlife from a mile away. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," John called out, setting down his hammer and walking over to greet them with a warm handshake. "Welcome to Mitchell Ranch. I hope you had a good flight." Robert Thompson stood frozen, watching as John gave the couple a tour of the property, pointing out the construction site for what would apparently be their private cabin. Later, after the Thompsons had stormed off and the Hendersons had departed with promises to return when their cabin was complete, Bill found John sitting by the stream. "You really think this will work?" the foreman asked. John skipped a stone across the water. "I don't know, but it's the only leverage I have. The Thompsons won't like having tourists next door. That's exactly what I'm counting on." John looked up at the half-built cabin. "I need to make them want the road open as much as I do." Bill nodded slowly. "It's a gamble." "Everything is." John stood up, brushing off his jeans. "They want my land because it's unspoiled, so I'll give them a choice: work with me on access or watch as I develop every scenic acre in their view." That night, John could barely sleep, his mind racing, with possibilities and fears. Was he making a huge mistake? Would this just make the situation worse? But when he finally drifted off, it was with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. Win or lose, he wasn't giving up without a fight. The local coffee shop fell silent when John walked in with his laptop. Everyone in town had heard about his fight with the Thompsons, and most folks sided with him, though few said so publicly. The Thompsons had deep pockets and weren't shy about throwing their weight around. John nodded to a few familiar faces and settled at a corner table. He'd been coming here for weeks now, using the Wi-Fi since his internet at the ranch was spotty at best. Today was the big day. He took a deep breath and clicked publish on the website he'd been building. Mitchell Ranch Experience went live, complete with stunning photos of the property, The historic barn against mountain backdrops, horses grazing in meadows, sunsets over the stream. The site promised exclusive access to authentic Montana ranch life, with activities like fishing, horseback riding, and hiking. The price, $100 per person for day visits, $500 for overnight stays once the cabins were complete. It was a gamble. John had spent his last savings on the helicopter service deal and the website. If this didn't work, he'd have nothing left to fight with. His phone rang barely an hour later. It was Jerry. "Have you lost your mind?" his lawyer asked without preamble. "Good morning to you too," John replied, sipping his coffee. "The Thompsons. Lawyers just called me. They're threatening to sue you for operating a commercial business in a residentially zoned area." "I checked the zoning," John said calmly. "Agricultural tourism is permitted as an auxiliary use on ranch land. I'm not changing the primary purpose of the property." There was a pause. "You really did your homework, didn't you?" "Had to. It was my only shot." 3 days later, John got his first real booking, a family of 4 from Seattle who wanted to experience authentic ranch life for a weekend. The following week, a nature photographer reserved 3 days to capture wildlife and landscapes. Word spread through online travel forums about the exclusive Montana gem with helicopter-only access. The Thompsons were not amused. Their lawyer sent a cease and desist letter, claiming John was deliberately diminishing the value and enjoyment of neighboring properties. John had Jerry draft a polite response pointing out that he was simply making the best of the access situation the Thompsons themselves had created. On a crisp Saturday morning, the first group of visitors arrived by helicopter, a middle-aged couple from Chicago who wanted to escape city life, just as John once had. He greeted them warmly, helped with their bags, and gave them a tour of the property. Bill took them, riding along the stream, pointing out wildlife and telling stories about the old days on the ranch. From his porch that evening, John could see lights blazing in the Thompson house. Through binoculars, he spotted Robert pacing in front of his picture windows, gesturing angrily while speaking on the phone. The sight gave John a small, guilty pleasure. By the third weekend, the pattern was established. The whoop 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 of approaching helicopters would send the Thompsons' weekend guests scurrying to see what was happening. John made sure activities were planned for maximum visibility. Trail rides along the property line, picnics by the stream, fishing expeditions right in front of the Thompsons' view. Construction continued on the guest cabins. John had scaled back the original plans to make them more rustic and authentic. Small log structures that blended with the landscape, but were still visible from the Thompsons' property. He made sure to schedule deliveries of building materials during the Thompsons' weekend gatherings, the helicopters deliberately flying low over their house. Word spread quickly. A travel blogger with a large following posted about the exclusive ranch retreat only accessible by helicopter, complete with dramatic aerial photos. An outdoor magazine requested an interview about innovative agritourism. John's booking calendar began filling up weeks in advance, despite the steep price tag. One evening, as John was showing a retired couple from Florida how to cast a fishing line in the stream, he spotted Linda Thompson watching from her deck. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away. John couldn't help but smile. The most surprising visitor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The helicopter touched down, and out stepped a man John recognized immediately. Tyler Woods, the famous country music star whose posters plastered half the bars in Montana. "Mr. Woods," John stammered, shaking the singer's hand. "This is unexpected." Tyler grinned. "Call me Ty. Heard about your place from a buddy who stayed here last week. Said it was the real deal, not like those fancy fake ranches the celebrities. I'll go too." Word of the star's visit spread like wildfire through town. Photos appeared online of Tyler fishing in the stream, riding one of John's horses, even helping Bill mend a fence. The publicity was worth more than any advertising John could have afforded. That evening, Tyler sat on the porch with John, sipping whiskey as the sun set behind the mountains. "Beautiful place you've got," the singer said. "Reminds me of my grandpa's farm where I grew up." "Thanks. Been in my family for generations." Tyler nodded toward the Thompson property. Heard about your trouble with the neighbors. Real shame how some folks come out here from the city and think they can just buy up everything and everyone. John shrugged. Just trying to protect what's mine. Well, you're doing it right. Tyler raised his glass. Nothing beats hitting them in the pocketbook. The next morning, a black SUV pulled up to John's house using the long northern route. Robert Thompson stepped out looking decidedly uncomfortable on the dusty ranch yard. "Mitchell," he said stiffly, "we need to talk." John leaned against his porch railing. "I'm listening." "This has gone far enough. Your guests are disrupting our property values and our privacy." "Funny," John replied. "That's exactly what I said when you blocked my access road." Robert glanced toward the partially built cabins, then at the helicopter landing area where Tyler Woods' pilot was preparing for departure. "I understand you're upset, but there must be a reasonable solution that doesn't involve turning this valley into a tourist trap. I'm all ears. What if—" Robert seemed to struggle with the words. "What if we discussed reopening limited access to the road for your personal use and essential ranch operations?" John tried not to show his excitement. This was exactly what he'd been hoping for. "Limited access won't work. I need full restoration of the easement, legally documented and permanently established. That's not possible. We have concerns about traffic, noise. More noise than helicopters flying over your house every weekend." Robert winced. "We could establish certain hours, specific days perhaps." "No deal," John said firmly. "Full access, or I continue developing. In fact, I just filed permits for 3 more cabins yesterday, and I'm considering adding a small event venue for weddings and corporate retreats. Helicopter access makes it exclusive, you know. People will pay top dollar." The color drained from Robert's face. "You wouldn't? Watch me." John nodded toward the property line. "Those trees would make a beautiful wedding backdrop, don't you think? Right in front of your living room windows." For several long moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Robert sighed. "Let me talk to Linda and our attorneys. Maybe we can work something out." As Robert's SUV disappeared down the road, Bill walked up beside John. "Think they'll cave?" he asked. John watched a hawk circling above the valley, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. They have no choice. The one thing the Thompsons want more than my land is their privacy and exclusive views, and I've just shown them they can't have either one without working with me. That evening, John updated his website, adding a new package. The Celebrity Experience. Live like a star on a real working ranch. The price, $1,000 per person per day, helicopter included. Within an hour, he had his first booking. The conference room in Jerry's law office felt too small for the tension it contained. John sat on one side of the polished table, Jerry beside, him with a stack of documents. Across from them, Robert and Linda Thompson were flanked by their lead attorney, a stern-faced woman in an expensive suit. "Before we begin," the Thompsons' attorney said, "my clients want to make it clear that they still maintain the easement documentation is flawed. Any agreement reached today is purely in the interest of being neighborly." Jerry fought back a smile. "Noted. My client is also interested in being neighborly, which is why he's willing to discuss limitations on his tourism operations." "Robert," Thompson cleared his throat. "Let's cut to the chase. We're prepared to remove the roadblocks and allow limited access through our property." "Define limited," John said. "Reasonable use for personal and agricultural purposes. No commercial traffic." John shook his head. "My business depends on deliveries, cattle transports, various service vehicles. That's non-negotiable. You can't expect us to allow unlimited traffic right past our home," Linda protested. "I expect exactly what the original easement provided," John replied calmly. "The same access my family has had for generations." The negotiations continued for hours. John held firm on his core demands while making small concessions on timing and frequency of larger deliveries. The Thompsons gradually realized they had little leverage. John's helicopter tours were becoming more popular every week, and each new cabin built on his property further diminished their privacy and exclusive views. Finally, Close to sunset, they reached an agreement. The roadblocks would be removed. The easement would be formally documented with precise language that couldn't be disputed again. In exchange, John would limit commercial traffic to certain hours and would consult with the Thompsons before any major construction projects visible from their property. "What about your tourist operation?" Robert asked as Jerry drafted the final agreement. John leaned back in his chair. "I'll scale it back to a reasonable level, no more than 2 helicopter visits per week, and I'll adjust the flight paths to minimize disturbance to your property." Linda looked relieved. "That seems fair. But," John added, "if the road access is ever restricted again for any reason, all limitations on my tourism activities are immediately void." The Thompsons exchanged glances, then nodded. As the final documents were being signed, Robert hesitated with the pen above the paper. "There's one more thing. The legal fees you've incurred because of this dispute. We're willing to cover them as a gesture of goodwill." John was surprised. "That's generous." "Not generosity," Robert said quietly. "Fairness. We may have been overzealous in protecting our privacy." 3 days later, a construction crew arrived to remove the concrete barriers. John stood watching as they loaded the last block onto a flatbed truck. The road that had been blocked for months was open again, a simple dirt path that meant everything to his livelihood. Bill walked up beside him. "Never thought I'd see this day. Makes 2 of us," John replied. "You gonna shut down the helicopter tours like you promised?" John smiled. "Mostly, but I might keep a few special packages available. Turns out there's a real market for exclusive ranch experiences." That evening, John drove into town using the newly reopened road. The trip took 15 minutes instead of the usual 45 around the northern route. At the local diner, several ranchers nodded to him with new respect. "Heard you won," Joe from the feed store said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Not many folks stand up to people with that kind of money and win." "Wasn't about winning," John replied, though part of him enjoyed the sentiment. "Just needed to protect what's mine." "Well, you did it smart. Use their own game against them." Joe grinned. "Whole town's talking about it." The next day, John was surprised to see Robert Thompson's SUV pull up to his house. Robert stepped out, looking more casual than usual, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that still had creases from the store. "Mitchell," he said with a nod. "Thought I'd stop by now that the road's open again." "What can I help you with?" John asked, wary of the unexpected visit. Robert seemed uncomfortable. "Linda and I have been talking. This whole situation got out of hand. We came to Montana for peace and quiet, to be part of this landscape. Instead, we've been acting just like the corporate sharks we were trying to escape." John wasn't sure what to say, so he waited. "Anyway," Robert continued, "we're hosting a neighborhood barbecue next weekend. Nothing fancy, just a get-together for the folks in the valley. We'd like you to come. Bring Bill, too." The invitation was the last thing John had expected. "I'll think about it." After Robert left, John walked to the east pasture where the half-built cabins stood. He'd put construction on hold as part of the agreement. Now he needed to decide what to do with them. 1 week later, John and Bill drove to the Thompsons' property for the barbecue. Several other neighboring ranchers were there, along with some folks from town. The atmosphere was cautiously friendly, longtime locals mixing with the Thompsons' city friends who had flown in for the weekend. Linda approached John with a plate of food. "I'm glad you came." "Thanks for inviting me," he replied. "We've been thinking," she said, looking out over the valley that stretched between their properties. "Those cabins you started building, instead of leaving them half-finished, what if we worked together?" John raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Well, you've clearly found a market for authentic ranch experiences, but managing visitors is a full-time job and you've got a ranch to run. Robert and I have experience in hospitality investments. What if we created a joint venture? You provide the authentic ranch experience, we handle the business and marketing side." It was an interesting proposal. "What about my actual ranching operations?" That would remain completely separate. This would just be a side business using the cabins you've already started. John thought about it. I'll need to see the details in writing, and I want it clearly stated that the road access remains permanently open, regardless of how this business partnership works out. Of course, Linda agreed. We've learned our lesson about trying to control access. 6 months later, the Mitchell-Thompson Ranch experience welcomed its first official guests. The 3 finished cabins were small but luxurious, blending seamlessly into the landscape. John and Bill handled the authentic ranch activities, horseback riding, cattle drives, fishing expeditions, while the Thompsons managed bookings and guest services. The arrangement worked surprisingly well. John's ranch operations flourished with the restored road access, and the tourism income provided a comfortable buffer against the ups and downs of cattle prices. The Thompsons got the exclusive Montana experience they had sought, now shared, with carefully vetted guests who appreciated the natural beauty without disrupting it. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the valley, John sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. He watched a group of visitors on horseback return from a ride, their excited voices carrying across the quiet air. On the distant ridge, the windows of the Thompson house reflected the pink-gold light of sunset. Bill sat down beside him. "Your uncle would be proud," he said, nodding toward the prospering ranch. "You found a way to protect the land without giving an inch," John smiled. "By charging $100. Smart move, that was." "Sometimes," John replied, "the best way to win isn't to fight harder. It's to change the game entirely." In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on the thermal, currents free and unhurried in the vast Montana sky.